Hello and welcome to the Reviews Brothers. I've decided to take on the massive task of compiling a list of the A to Z of hidden gems for the PlayStation 1. We're going to be taking a look at 10 games starting with each letter of the alphabet that you may have missed because they got lost in the mountain of games available for the system. Make sure you check out the other letters in the series and don't forget to let me know what other hidden gems are out there, as there's no way I'll know about them all. Now, how about I shut the hell up, you press that subscribe button and we take a look at some games together. First up is B.L.U.E, Legend of Water. This is a cool game where you play as Maya, who goes to visit her dad at his work excavating an underwater ruin. But this isn't a trip for fun. Maya has been having some strange dreams about the temple that they've been working on, so she needs to go and investigate and find out what the hell is going on. The game basically has two gameplay types. First of all, you're on the base where you can travel between all the rooms and talk to everyone on board. Here you'll get items, clues and maps that help you progress. Then there's the diving sections where you have to swim in the sea and in the ruins, solving puzzles and ultimately the mystery of your dreams. The sections on the boat are kind of just filler really, and they'll fill out the story mostly for you. And you'll need to explore each room multiple times as talking to certain people triggers events elsewhere on the base. At first this can make it easy to wander around aimlessly, but you'll eventually figure out just to talk to everyone and interact with everything you possibly can, and you'll eventually progress. You'll also get to learn about the relationships of all the characters. It's actually quite interesting. The bulk of the game, however, is the underwater swimming sections, where you explore a number of locations, mainly a ruin with your dolphin companion, and you'll have to work together to get through these sections, and you can actually give commands to your dolphin buddy who will help you out. Sometimes you'll need to get him to wait somewhere or even distract some of the bigger sea creatures that might want to eat you so you can sneak past. You can also help him to actually assist you, as you might need to push obstacles out the way and that sort of thing. You get a pretty generous air meter considering you're underwater, and there's pockets of air all over the place, which is nice as you don't really have to worry about drowning too often, though beware, it can happen. Graphically, the game looks alright. There is a lot of pop-up in the swimming sections, but that never really bothered me. There's aquatic life all over the place, which sometimes is hard to make out what it is, but for the most part, it's fine. The controls here are easy to get the hang of, and everything runs pretty smoothly. It's actually a really cool game that you can put on to have a bit of a relax with, as it's deliberately slow paced and the puzzle solving is perfect for when you want to chill with a game, but it can get a little bit dark in the story. This is definitely one to check out. Bakumatsu Roman from SNK is a one-on-one fighting game featuring a roster of samurai warriors. Also, as far as I know, it wasn't released outside of Japan. As it is an SNK game, you know that it's going to have some polish. It's all made up of 2D sprites, which of course means that it looks really good, and while it doesn't have the same level of detail or animation as some of the other fighters on the system, it is still a fantastic looking and playing game. This is a slower, more deliberate fighting game than some of the one-on-ones that you get on the system, and you'll need to try to be a little bit more tactical with your attacks. You've got a few attack buttons, as well as a block button, which, if timed correctly, also acts as a parry, leaving your opponent open for devastating attacks. You'll need to get used to this, as most of your attacks do have quite a few frames of animation, especially the more powerful ones, so it is easy for your opponent to hit you with a quick attack while your powerful slices are still winding up. But of course this works both ways, and then when you get good enough, you can counter their attacks quite well too. As you'd expect, all the characters play differently, and it uses the same Street Fighter style inputs for most moves, though it can be quite hard to pull some of them off in the middle of a fight, especially with its slower pace. What's nice though is that you do have a command list in the pause menu here, so you can always pause the game just to check out how to do your special moves. There's the usual selection of modes. You've got story mode, arcade mode and survival. There may be a bit more nuance to these, but all the text here is in Japanese, so I didn't really know what the hell was going on. But all the modes basically just require you to kick the crap out of people. If you're a fan of fighting games, this one is worth a look. Beyond the Beyond is a stupidly named RPG from Camelot, the creators of the popular Golden Sun Game Boy Advance games. It's a JRPG, so you already know the story. You're a kid who got his first downstairs hair, so naturally you've got to set off to save the land from a bunch of evil bastards. Turns out though that all your friends and older relatives are also famous warriors, and they actually help you out on your quest to take it in turns to punch things. The story here is actually quite interesting, though the cutscenes do drag on a lot of the time and there's a lot of dialogue. Thankfully, the gameplay is actually really fun and kept me wanting to play. You explore a pretty large kingdom that has the usual tropes of villages, caves, forests, deserts, etc., each of which has plenty of monsters. Some of these pop up everywhere, but what's nice is that each area does have its own unique enemies too. The game is of course full of random battles, and these all look really cool, at least I think so. The sprite work here is great, and all your characters and enemies look decent, and they've got some really cool designs. What's interesting here, and something that actually took me a little while to get used to, is that you only actually control the actions for your main character. The rest of your party just sort of do what they want while you're in battles. This can be annoying, as there are times where you want to heal certain characters with your healer, but just have to sort of hope that they'll do what you want them to. But to be fair, they actually do a decent job of keeping your party alive. Of course, you do have items to do this yourself if you do need to. None of the battles last too long, which is good, as they are pretty frequent, which I didn't really mind here, as it made the grinding a little less repetitive, and I did find that it was always an appropriate level for most of the fights I was in. As it's a turn-based RPG, you can't really fault the controls, as everything is just basically menus. You've got various actions you can choose from in the overworld, but you can just use the triangle button and the game will do the appropriate action that you need to do anyway. It's odd that it isn't the X button, but that's no big deal. So yeah, I mean, if you've ever played a turn-based JRPG, then you basically already know everything about this. It doesn't really do anything new, but it is a solid game with an engaging story, cool characters, and some fun battles. Time to get crazy now with Bishi Bashi Special. This is a mental minigame compilation that plays a lot like the WarioWare games from Nintendo. There's no story, instead you just choose a game mode, all of which involve completing a number of minigames, all of which have requirements to progress. If you fail, then you lose a life, lose all your lives, and it's game over, obviously. But man, this is one of the most fun, wacky games I've played on the PlayStation, and is an absolute blast in multiplayer. The minigames are of course the star of the show, and there's an amazing variety of them. You'll be making burger orders for people, jumping through shark-invested water, racing a mini, kung fu fighting, playing Spot the Difference, and so much more. Before each game, you're given the instructions on how to play, so there's never an excuse for you or your friend to say they don't know what the hell is going on. Though actually playing some of the games will be confusing when the first time you try. The controls here are great. Each game tends to use a different setup, and some of them even try to rely on you knowing the colour of the symbols on the controller, which I do not. So I had to keep looking at the controller to find out that X was blue, triangle was green, etc. The graphics here, I really love them, and again, they are a mix of styles and it works well. Most of them are 2D with polygons thrown in here and there, and the sound design here is great as well, and I really love the music. Everything has that crazy Japanese game show style to it, and it just works so damn well. Really, that's kind of all there is to say about those games. It's one of those games that you really need to play, preferably with a friend to experience. But trust me, you'll have a damn good time playing this one. Blast Radius from Psygnosis is a 3D space combat game where you choose from a modest selection of spacecraft, then set out across the galaxy taking on missions that mostly involve blowing things up. What I quite like about this game is that really that's kind of all the story you get. There's no messing around. This is an arcade style game that focuses on some deliberately simple mission objectives and provides controls that are easy to get hold of, and then you are off. The missions themselves are decent enough, with you usually just having to destroy a certain number of enemies, but there's also escort and protection missions where you have to stop friendlies from being blown to bits. These missions are often very difficult though, as it can be hard to keep track of the enemies, though you do have a handy radar. Graphically, the game looks pretty decent. All the ships have a good amount of detail on them, and there's some nice lighting effects here and there. Each of the selectable ships have a distinct style to them, as well as your usual array of lasers and missiles, and of course health, power and armor stats. Controlling your ship is easy, as you're always flying around in a 3D environment. You use the shoulder buttons to rotate and the D-pad to change direction. You've also got a few attack buttons for your lasers and missiles. In between missions you can upgrade your ship with the credits that you earn, and there's even a few really powerful ships that you can unlock. My biggest problem with the game is that I found it quite hard to be consistently hitting enemies. I think that your weapons should fire bullets a bit faster, and you really have to overcompensate with firing ahead of them in order just to hit them. And I did find it almost impossible to hit anything with missiles, so just stopped using them after a while, though they do have one of my all-time favourite sound effects that I'm sure is from the He-Man cartoons. Also, as it's basically all set in space, everything is pretty much black most of the time, and this makes it hard to spot enemies, but once you get used to the radar and the fact that you have a handy button that locks onto enemies and highlights them, you do kind of get used to it. But this is actually a pretty fun space shooter that isn't particularly complex and does have some really tough missions very early on, but it is worth a play, especially as the music here is awesome with a cool techno soundtrack. I'm guessing the incredibly generic name probably meant most people ignored this, but it's definitely not a bad game. Next up is a kind of strange game called Battle Hunter, at least it's strange to me. This is sort of a board game action RPG roguelike thing. Let me try to explain. At the start of the game you create your character, or characters, you can create a few. Then, with your selected chosen character, you chat with a shady looking dude who is probably in a whole lot of registers for bad people, and he tells you that you need to find him a certain item. Then you and 3 opponents are dropped onto a randomly created game board along with a bunch of randomly dropped item boxes. The item boxes contain, well, items of course, but only one of them contains the specific item that you're looking for. So basically it's a race to find the correct item and then make it to the exit. The game is turn-based and each character has their own stats. You've got cards that you use for movement, which kind of act as a dice really. And you also have trap cards that you can put on tiles near you, but be careful, as well as your enemies triggering these, if you forget where they are and trigger it yourself, you'll also take damage. There are also enemies on each board which you can fight. These enemies are tough, but you do gain experience and level up your characters by fighting them. Of course, you can also battle other treasure hunters in order to steal items from them. Anyone that loses all their HP isn't out though, they're just sent back to the starting point on the map and they lose any items they have. The first few times I played this, I was actually quite confused, but once I got used to how it worked, I had a blast playing it, and it's actually pretty addictive. The graphics are all 2D sprites, and they look fine, though they're not really anything particularly impressive, or anything that would look out of date on a 16-bit system. The controls work fine, as it's basically all menus, so you can't really mess up, though a few of the menus can be quite confusing, and actually starting the game took me way longer than it needed to, as there's no real explanation of how or where to create characters, though I guess that'd be something that would be in the manual. Playing the game though is really good fun. Be aware that it starts off pretty damn tough though, and you'll need to level up your character in order to get better movement and attack cards, so the more you play, the easier it becomes. And you can of course play this in multiplayer, which if you have a few like-minded friends, can be a whole lot of fun. This is another game that probably got overlooked as it has a boring name and doesn't look all that great, but give it an hour or so and you'll soon be having fun with it. Well worth checking out. Brave Fencer Musashi is probably the most well-known game in this video, and for good reason. It's a really cool action RPG where you play as Musashi, who is off to rescue a kidnapped damsel in distress. You know, the classic. Musashi is a cool samurai guy who uses his excellent carving skills to make mincemeat out of enemies with some easy to pull off combos. You can also pick up and throw enemies, which is very effective. And on top of this, you even have the ability to steal your opponent's moves that lets you take characteristics from some of your enemies. These are really cool, as if there's enemies with guns, you get the ability to shoot. Others let you do things like stun enemies. These powers often become part of the puzzles that you'll be solving, and it's really nice to see the powers actually having a real use other than just murder. The graphics here are good, but nothing really amazing. However, the cool cartoon art style is very appealing, and though the character models are a bit basic, it does work. You get a fixed camera pretty much the whole time, and the game plays in a restricted space for the most part, but again, that just helps keep the game going at a good pace. In between stages, you visit a town or two. These are quite large 3D environments, and actually I found them pretty hard to find my way around thanks to the lack of camera control and the fact that it was all very zoomed in. It was kind of hard to find where I needed to go a lot of the time. but really that doesn't matter too much, as these are mainly where you go to just buy new items and progress the story. When you get to the combat stages, things do get much better, and these stages are a lot of fun. The boss fights here are really good too. They will have weak spots and patterns that you'll need to figure out, just as all classic boss fights should, and even though some of them were quite tough and there were times where the hit detection was questionable, they were always pretty fun, and I wanted to get to the next one. Overall, I had a lot of fun playing this one, and I actually found it hard to put down. This is highly recommended.
Welcome!
Beavis and Butthead Virtual Stupidity is a port of the point-and-click PC game that for some reason only ever got released in Japan, but thankfully there is a translation available online, although strangely the minigame voices haven't changed and they're still in crazy Japanese, but it is interesting to see how these guys sound in another country. The story here is that you are Beavis and Butthead, a pair of losers who decide that they want to join Todd's gang, because Todd is cool. To do this, you have to walk around your town visiting the school, parks, your work and home, as well as other places you'll find along the way. You'll need to find items to solve puzzles that often don't make a lick of sense. But that doesn't really matter, as that was kind of the point of these point-and-click games back in the day. The puzzles and solutions are mainly here for comedy, not logic, and it's part of the charm of the game. The controls here are decent. It's the D-pad to move the cursor, then you just select what you want to do with the object or person. It works exactly as well as it needs to. The puzzles can be tricky to figure out, which is kind of the point, and sometimes they do come down to just using every combination of item together and talking with every character over and over until something new happens. But again, this is how these games work, so it isn't really a negative. Something that is a bit annoying though is that none of the in-game talking is skippable, which is fine the first time you hear it, but if you do exhaust the dialogue options or accidentally click on a character you didn't mean to, you'll be listening to the same lines over and over again without being able to skip them while you figure out what you're meant to be doing, and some of these can go on for 10 or 15 seconds. There are also some minigames here which you'll need to beat in order to progress the story. These are always very simple, but are actually quite fun and a nice way to break up the action. Graphically, the game is really good. It's all hand-drawn sprites, which it should be, and it looks just like the cartoon. The game also uses footage from the TV shows, as well as a new cartoon sections to further the story. You even get a music video from B.L.U.E. And as a Beavis and Butthead fan, I was very happy with this. The game does have a great sense of humour, and anyone that is a fan of the show will love all the references and jokes in the game. You also have the proper voice actors for all the characters too, as it would be a crime not to. If you're a fan of point-and-click games or Beavis and Butthead, then definitely check this one out. It's a good time. Time for some bugs now, in Bugs Bunny Lost in Time from Infogrames. There's a lot of Bugs Bunny games, and surprisingly there's a few of them that are actually fairly good, and that includes this one of course. This is a 3D platform game where you control Bugs, who mistakes a time machine for a carrot juice dispenser, which I know, we've all been there. The only way to get back to his normal time is to explore some 3D levels, collecting clocks and eating carrots. The graphics here are a good 3D representation of Bugs and the Looney Tunes world, and the game has some really good animation and cutscenes. You get a variety of worlds all based on different time periods, so you'll be visiting medieval places, prehistoric places, pirate places and more. The levels are all a decent size, and you get a few stages per area that has a certain number of clocks and golden carrots that you'll need, as well as a boss fight of some sort. The clocks are the main thing you need here, and they're often just laying around in hard to find places, but sometimes you do have to complete an objective to get one. Fairly standard 3D platform stuff. Thankfully, Bugs controls well for a 3D platformer on the PS1. You can run, jump, roll and tunnel your way through the levels, defeating enemies and solving the puzzles. It all works well though. Having said that, the jumping can be quite imprecise, and there were quite a few times when I found it hard to judge how far I actually needed to jump, which is odd as you do get a shadow that you can see, and there is also a button that you can press while you're jumping, and it makes you stop dead where you are in the air and start to descend. Once I figured this out, it does actually make it easier, as you can deliberately just over jump and then hit the button when you see your shadow. It still wasn't perfect, but it worked. Thankfully, you have unlimited lives, so if you do die, you just go back to the nearest checkpoint, which can actually be quite far away, so just don't die, silly. Along the way, you'll meet a ton of familiar faces, from Daffy Duck and Elmer Fudd to that witch person who I recognise from loads of Looney Tunes stuff, but I have no idea who she is. These characters usually act as the bosses in the game, though you don't always have to fight them. You often just have to beat them in some kind of mini-game, and I kind of like these as they're often references to the cartoons. The voice work here is great, and as far as I can tell, it's all the proper voice actors, which is good, and really, aside from the game being a bit easy and not having the best camera, it is a solid 3D platform game that's good fun and just the right length that it doesn't outstay its welcome. And finally for today, here is Broken Helix from Konami. This is a bit of a strange game, but I kinda like it. You play as a soldier bloke who is sent into Area 51, which has been infiltrated by some bastards, and you've got to go in there and rescue the scientists and take out the terrorist menace. Now, the game does sound serious, but it's actually packed with loads of humour, and best of all, your character is voiced by none other than Ash himself, Bruce Campbell, who is constantly spouting out one-liners, some of which are original and some of which are references to his and other people's movies. In fact, there's quite a few pop culture references all over the place here. But don't let the light tone trick you. This is a really tough game. You're initially given 20 minutes to find and defuse some bombs, and this actually took me quite a long time to do, as you have to avoid security cameras, you can't kill scientists, and if you venture too far into the complex, then you'll set off the bombs anyway. If the terrorist leader sees you on any of the cameras, then he'll blow the joint and it's game over. At first, this led to some game overs very quickly, and I really had no idea why, but then I started to pay more attention and I used my weapons and inventory correctly to get a little further every time. You've got the stun gun, which you can use to stun enemies, as well as disable electronics for a short time. You can use these on cameras so they don't see you, and then you have to explore the complex, finding keys and completing tasks like deactivating sentry guns, so again, you can get that little bit further. You also get the usual lot of laser weapons, grenades and rockets to use as well. Later on in the game, you of course meet some aliens, and you can even take control of some of the remote control robots that are found in the complex. You'll need to do this to enter toxic or small areas that a person couldn't normally go. The graphics here are nothing really to shout home about, but they're fine. Standard PS1 stuff really. The controls work well, though it is tank controls, so it can take a while to get used to. Generally though, you don't need to worry about aiming up and down, which is nice. The inventory system can be a pain in the ass to get used to, as no items are used automatically. You've got to make sure that they're selected before you can use them, and often I didn't realise that I'd picked up the item I needed, so I was wandering around for ages not knowing what to do, and didn't realise that I actually had the item I needed anyway. But that's kind of a me problem, I should just pay more attention. Now I did actually have pretty good time with this one. Maybe it's because I'm a huge Bruce Campbell fan, but the game is a good tongue-in-cheek time. Just be warned, it is really tough, mainly due to the time limit and lack of any real direction, but after exploring and playing quite safely, the game can be beaten in about 2 or so hours when you know what you're doing. Definitely stick with it and you'll have a good time. Groovy. So there you go, 10 hidden gems for the PS1, starting with the letter B. Make sure you check out the other letters in the series and let me know what other hidden gems there are. There's so many games out there, it's impossible for me to know them all. On screen now, you can see where you can follow us, so please do so. We've got loads of cool content for everyone to enjoy. Now, all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.